war ended decades ago, but its echoes are still hiding underground at the bottom of rivers and inside abandoned bunkers. Today, you're going to see some of the most unbelievable military discoveries, including finds that few people even believed existed. Buckle up, because this is going to be interesting. Check out what happens when an abandoned military base holds onto its secrets for decades. This isn't just rusty scrap metal. It's an entire arsenal of artillery shells, missiles, and an anti-aircraft gun, all frozen exactly where they left it. Welcome to an ordinary construction site in Zhengzhou, China, where an excavator suddenly uncovered not a pipe or a cable, but a 70-year-old aerial bomb. The bomb squad evacuated the area, carefully transported it to a riverbank, and finally defused it. This Chieftain main battle tank had been retired and forgotten, but the team at Tanks-A-Lot decided to give it one last chance. The turret was jammed, the transmission was dead, and it had been sitting for years. But after hours of preparation, the engine finally roared back to life. The waters off of Turkey held this secret for decades until divers went deep enough to find a military DC-3 resting on the seabed. The entire aircraft is now becoming one of the world's most unusual underwater museums. How did a German Mauser C-96 from 1895, one of the world's first semi-automatic pistols and a weapon that survived 2 world wars, end up in an ordinary garage? This Italian river kept a sunken tank hidden for decades and only gave up its secret after the water completely dried out. A German M38 gas mask from World War II can even be hard to find in a museum, but 2 of them were discovered here on the same slope just 15 meters from each other. Sometimes the most interesting discoveries look like ordinary garbage, like this drum magazine from a PPSH, one of the most recognizable parts of the legendary submachine gun. Planning to search a beach with a metal detector in hopes of finding jewelry? Well, be prepared to uncover something far more incredible. Hidden in the undergrowth of the island of Sakhalin lies an entire airfield with an unusual history. Built by the Japanese in the early 1900s, it later became a Soviet air defense hub. Today, it's a time capsule, complete with the remains of a supersonic MiG-23. Meet the Baba Yaga drone, capable of carrying up to 20 kilograms and used for precision bombing, nighttime attacks, and logistical missions along the waterfront. This particular one, however, probably isn't going to be flying anywhere again. Key Mountain in Quang Ngai Province looks totally ordinary until you take a wrong step. Thousands of bomblets left over from the war are still buried beneath the ground, turning every hike into a potential lottery. Most people wouldn't give this piece of junk a second look, but it's actually a triplex, a piece of multi-layered armored glass used in a tank's observation devices. What started out as an ordinary day of magnet fishing turned epic when these guys pulled up a safe filled with sniper rifles. It looks like this abandoned 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft gun is still guarding the skies above this place, and it may very well remain at its post until time finally turns it into rust. This Li-2 had been lying on top of a cliff just a few kilometers from the United States since 1971. After delivering election ballots to border guards, the plane entered heavy fog and crashed while attempting to turn around. This is a public beach in Quy Nhon, Vietnam, and now someone can brag that they spent years swimming directly above an American M41 Walker Bulldog tank. Plenty of divers would love to find something unique, but this amateur brought up a genuine artifact from the Crusades, a 900-year-old sword that had been resting near an ancient ship anchorage dating back almost 4,000 years. This abandoned bunker also served as a fire station, and guess what it still had besides a pile of gas masks and an old fire truck? Working electricity. A major battle must have taken place in this forest in Germany, because finding an 80-year-old rusty helmet here seems easier than finding berries or mushrooms. Do you think something like this should go to a museum, or is it fair to keep in a private collection? Getting into the bunker was only the beginning of their luck. Inside, they found a forgotten arsenal of shells that had been left untouched for decades. It's not every day you see a fighter plane being raised from the seabed, especially one that had been lying there since April 16, 1943, when its pilot was forced to land on the water after the engine failed. This 17th century Ottoman Sabre survived wars, long journeys, and 4 centuries beneath the ground before finally ending up back in human hands. The discovery may help historians study both the weapon-making techniques of the period and how the blade ended up thousands of miles from the Ottoman Empire. Picture this. A World War II tank turret lay buried under several meters of soil for nearly 80 years, and digging it out took almost 3 full days. Let us know in the comments if you know what vehicle this is. Swamps are good at preserving surprises, and this one had been there since January 1943. It was a shell for a French 155mm Schneider howitzer model 1917 captured by the Wehrmacht during the Battle of France. Even 8 decades later, it was still in remarkable condition. These Soviet T-34-85s survived World War II, but they didn't end up in museums. In the 1970s, they were dug into the ground on Yemen's island of Socotra and turned into permanent defensive firing positions. Fishermen off the coast of Vietnam's Phu Yen province pulled up something much larger than their usual catch. A heavy Chinese torpedo measuring 6.8 meters long and 54 centimeters wide, complete with its tail fins. Finding the spot in a swamp where German soldiers had thrown away their equipment would already be incredibly lucky. Finding a German Mauser 98K carbine there makes it even better. If you ever find an artillery shell buried in the ground while searching for military relics, call the bomb squad. What you're seeing in this video should only be handled by trained professionals like this woman. Look at the ammunition stockpile that was hiding at the bottom of the Tian River. Local residents pulled it up with their bare hands and turned it over to the military. Their catch included tons of machine gun ammunition and propellant charges. Let us know how you think they discovered it. Imagine researchers' surprise when they raised a German Focke-Wulf 58C from a depth of 110 meters in France's Lake Bouget. The plane had been lying there since 1943, but the real shocker was how rare it was. Before this discovery, the only known surviving example was sitting thousands of kilometers away in an aviation museum in Rio de Janeiro. Just a few meters from an ordinary soccer field in North Macedonia, 15,000 World War I shells were discovered underground. Who knows how many goals they had already witnessed from down there. In Boden, Sweden, about 150 kilometers from the border, stands a fortress built for a single purpose: stopping a possible Russian invasion. Its 5 forts and defense network were put there for a reason, close enough to the coast to matter, but far enough from the border to be protected. Apparently, this place was simply forgotten after the collapse of the Soviet Union, along with dozens of crates of ammunition for tanks, howitzers, and helicopters. This man came here looking for gold, but instead of treasure, he found an unexploded shell beneath the stream. What could have been a call to the local jeweler ended up being a call to the bomb squad. Check out what you can find in an ordinary forest. Stages from a Soviet Bark ballistic missile, one of the USSR's most ambitious weapons projects. It was designed for submarines as a direct response to the American Trident II, but after the collapse of the Soviet Union and a series of failed tests, the program was canceled. What was supposed to become a terror of the oceans is now rusting away among the trees. In 1965, this Fairchild C-82A cargo plane made an emergency landing after icing on the carburetor caused both engines to fail. It came down in the deep snow of Alaska, where it has remained ever since. In 1943, during the American landings in southern Italy, some of the military equipment never made it ashore and remained at the bottom of the sea for more than 80 years. As you've probably guessed, this M4 Sherman was one of them. The Cold War pushed the United States to build White Alice in Alaska, a network of antennas designed to sound the alarm in case of a Soviet missile attack. The irony is that satellites made the system obsolete by the 1970s. Today, it's mainly useful to tourists with cameras. A single piece of metal simply refused to melt at a Missouri scrapyard, and thank goodness it did. Workers pulled it from the pile and discovered that it was a rare World War II Purple Heart, a U.S. military decoration whose modern form was established in 1932. When you start rebuilding an auto shop in Tokyo's Adachi district, the last thing you would expect to find beneath the foundation is a Type 3 anti-aircraft gun from the Imperial Japanese Army. This weapon was once used to defend the skies from American B-29s during the Pacific War. Imagine driving through an ordinary village and seeing German and Soviet helmets, an MG-42, and entire bundles of bayonets sitting in the garden beds of a local farmer's yard. I have no idea what these guys were looking for in the forest, but I bet they weren't expecting to find an actual missile. You could expect to find almost anything in the mountains after the spring thaw, but World War I artillery shells is a whole other level. 50 meters down in Austria's Lake Attersee rests a concrete U-boat. And of course, a submarine in an alpine lake sounds completely made up, and yet here it is, right in front of you. One of the most unusual sights from the Cold War can be found in the Arizona desert, the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. Today, this place is where more than 4,400 aircraft and around 40 spacecraft, collectively worth a total of over $35 billion, are stored. But this isn't a scrapyard. The dry climate keeps the equipment remarkably well preserved, saving the U.S. military hundreds of millions of dollars in spare parts every year. Take a look at what was found off the coast of Norway. A long-lost German cruiser called the Karlsruhe. Sonar first detected the wreck 3 years earlier, but it wasn't until 2020 that Norwegian specialists finally managed to get a closer look. During World War II, coastal guns like this one formed part of the Atlantic Wall and kept the entrances to the fjords in their sights, deterring enemy ships for decades. Today, this mechanism is one of the few still standing at its post. When Allied forces captured the German airfield at Nordholz, they didn't want to deal with all the abandoned equipment. Instead, they buried this Stug 3 and several other vehicles in pits along the runway, walked away, and forgot about them for 80 years. These workers had no idea how lucky they were. Throughout the construction project, they had been walking directly across a minefield and somehow made it out unscathed. At the top of Mount Limbara in Sardinia, 1,300 meters above sea level, a former secret NATO base is slowly rusting away. Back in 1966, its massive antennas began transmitting encrypted signals between Italy and Spain that were almost impossible to intercept. Satellite communications made the base obsolete in 1993, and it has been frozen in time ever since. Easter morning at Lauderdale by the Sea didn't exactly go according to plan when the waves washed a naval mine directly onto the beach. Not the most traditional Easter surprise, but definitely an unforgettable one. More than a century later, the battlefields of World War I are still filled with tons of unexploded shells. The fields of Flanders and the Somme are hiding millions of them, and every season, farmers continue to dig up these unexpected gifts. Some people spend their weekends looking for mushrooms in the forest. Well, these people found a ballistic missile silo instead. That metal detector of theirs certainly paid for itself. In the late 1950s, the Soviet Union was desperate to know about a nuclear strike before the missiles arrived. That led to the Duga-1, a radar system near Chernobyl capable of detecting ballistic missile launches from up to 9,000 kilometers away. To conceal the enormous flow of equipment and materials, it was built alongside the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and marked on every map as a young pioneer camp. Hanoi's legendary Long Bien Bridge survived hundreds of American air raids during the Vietnam War, and traces of those attacks are still being found nearby. This 3,000-pound aerial bomb had been buried in the ground for more than half a century. This is the Saab 35 Draken, the first mass-produced supersonic fighter capable of reaching Mach 2 and using ordinary roads as runways. This particular aircraft, however, is more of a reminder of how emergency landings can turn out sometimes. This M4 Sherman sank in 1942 along with a convoy delivering Lend-Lease equipment to the Soviet Union. Surprisingly, the freezing Arctic waters preserved the tank far better than ordinary soil ever could have. Look at what vinegar can do when it comes to restoring World War II medals. The difference between before and after speaks for itself. Imagine finding out that a 1.6-ton bomb, nearly 3 meters long, has been lying in the yard of an ordinary home in Vietnam for decades. People had been living directly above it without the slightest idea that it was there the entire time. If you don't understand why this guy's getting so emotional over some rusty pistol, you probably don't realize that the Luger is one of the most iconic handguns of World War II. I doubt anyone was expecting a dip in the river to result in discovering a bomb weighing more than 300 kilograms. This tree continued growing for decades after a Panzerfaust round struck it back in the 1940s. Eventually, the trunk swallowed it completely, growing around the casing so thoroughly that it could only be found with a detector. Yeah, that's right. This is more than 3,000 bombs left over from the war with Japan. Construction workers uncovered them, and discoveries like this really make you wonder what else might be hiding directly beneath our feet. Not a bad discovery, right? But that wasn't all they found that day. Beneath the floor of an ordinary home in Vietnam was an entire graveyard containing around 100 shells and bombs. It's unlikely that any of the neighbors knew that the owner of this garage had been storing more than 5 tons of ammunition left over from the Vietnam War. It's hard to believe that these 2 artillery pieces from 1581 could have survived in such incredible condition. They were found among the ruins of the first Spanish colony established along the Strait of Magellan, and yet, here they are. The irony is that this fighter jet was once considered the peak of technology and a symbol of military power. Today, it has become nothing more than an unwanted part of the landscape. This Spanish HA-1112 was once a movie star, but once filming ended, it was simply forgotten inside a hangar, where it spent years sitting beside other abandoned aircraft. What are the chances of digging up an enormous 120mm howitzer weighing nearly 5 tons during routine excavation work in the middle of a city? The odds are incredibly low, but apparently not zero, because that's exactly how the gun from a legendary KV-2 heavy tank was discovered in Ukraine. According to one theory, it had been removed from the tank and hidden during the Army's retreat in 1941. These are the remains of one of the strangest military vehicles of the 20th century, the Vespa Bazooka. It carried a 75mm anti-tank gun and used to be dropped from airplanes alongside paratroopers. It's not every day that you come across an entire field of abandoned military aircraft with 29 MiG-21 fighters and 5 Su-22 bombers slowly rusting away beneath the open sky. This is an F-104 DJ, and back in the 1960s, each one would cost as much as $1.5 million. Today, its real value lies in the emotions you experience when you stumble across one at an abandoned site. More than a century after the front line passed through this area, you can still find the tools of war, including this World War I signal pistol. Believe it or not, during a single dive to the bottom of the river, this guy used a magnet to find parts from several different weapons and an almost complete Luger. Check out this souvenir from a forest in France, a German M39 hand grenade. At first, these people had been digging up nothing but broken glass and trash, but eventually they stumbled upon some real treasure. Be sure to let us know in the comments if you recognize this pistol. Workers didn't know what they would find while cleaning toxic waste from the Congaree River in South Carolina, but they certainly weren't expecting cannonballs, bullets, and Confederate swords that had been thrown into the river more than 150 years ago. These Australians were simply cleaning up a beach when they discovered a bottle containing letters from 1916. The letters told the story of two soldiers sailing to France to fight in World War I. There aren't many places where you can find a post-apocalyptic equipment graveyard quite like this one in Eritrea. Take a look at this pile of scrap metal. It's all that's left of an aircraft that spent years resting 80 meters beneath the Black Sea. These fire trucks have stood motionless for decades, waiting for an order that never came. This British bunker, which is gradually sliding off the edge of a cliff, is one of dozens of nuclear monitoring posts built during the Cold War in 1959. It was designed to record the effects of a possible nuclear strike and became a symbol of an era when the world was seriously preparing for the apocalypse. This folding Zeiss Icon camera had been capturing images of the world back in the 1930s. Then it ended up underground, where it spent the next several decades. These people got lucky enough to discover an underground bunker packed with untouched gas masks. More than 74 million mines like this one were produced during World War II, and judging by its condition, this one had probably been lying there ever since. What are the chances that an ordinary rusty piece of metal in the forest turns out to be a bayonet that has been there since World War I? Very few people ever come across an abandoned cannon that wasn't used for firing at enemies, but at snowy mountain slopes to deliberately trigger avalanches. What started out as an ordinary excavation for World War II artifacts led to the discovery of a medallion containing a letter. Thanks to what was written inside, researchers were able to identify the soldier it belonged to. No, this isn't another bayonet or even a rifle. It's a German Panzerfaust, a disposable anti-tank grenade launcher from World War II. Have you ever seen Austrian fortifications like these? And do you know what they were originally built to defend against? It's hard to imagine an arsenal of military weapons this large hiding in the basement of an ordinary apartment building. Some fishermen thought they had pulled up just a piece of metal, but the military identified it as part of the engine from an American F-105 Thunder Chief shot down during the Vietnam War. At first, this looked like a random piece of equipment in the waters of the Lombok Strait, But after examining it, sailors discovered that it was a Chinese monitoring system designed to attach to the seabed and transmit data to the surface through communication buoys. Now, hold your breath, because this pistol that was found with a metal detector dates all the way back to the 19th century. Don't breathe on it. In fact, don't even look at it. On to the next one. Congratulations! You are now looking at an 18th century warship found off the coast of Mexico. Nearby were 2.5-meter cannons that the crew had thrown overboard in a desperate attempt to keep the ship from sinking. For more than 150 years, this tree grew on the site of one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War in 1863. When it was finally cut down, look what was found inside. Apparently, all you need to make discoveries like these are a metal detector, some knowledge of historic battlefields, and a little bit of luck. These divers were lucky enough to get to explore an Italian Breda 2065 anti-aircraft gun from a tanker called Romagna, which sank in 1943. Check out everything this guy managed to find with a metal detector in just half a day. This Soviet 76mm regimental gun had been waiting since 1943 to return to the surface. During routine work on the river, it was finally raised from the bottom and shown to the world once again. It seems like every possible discovery has already been made, but make sure to come back to the channel in a few days, because I'm sure we'll have even more incredible finds waiting for you by then. See you next time.